Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Christopher Hall. I'm Managing Director of GTN's Atlantic region. I'll just give people another minute or so to log in, and then we will get started. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Very interesting topic that we have to cover off today. Just some of the logistical points. Everybody's on mute. If you have questions, I'll be monitoring questions throughout the presentation. And you can ask those questions on the questions section on the right-hand side of your screen. There should be a box for questions. You can ask anything in there. We will open it up at the end as well for more questions. But please, if something comes to mind during the presentation, feel free to put that in and we'll get it answered as soon as possible. We will be having a couple of polls during the discussion today just to find out a little bit about our audience and what it is that people are struggling with in this area. So what we're talking about today is really how we pull together the issues of equity with a mobile population. So just as at the outset, I thought what we could do is I'll just outline what the issue is. And then what we're going to do is we're really going to focus on, a lot of people know what the issue is, but we're really going to focus on the practicalities of bringing that all together and techniques and advice on how to make sure that the end-to-end process is something that is well managed, well delivered, and means that you maintain the employee benefit in that equity, which is, of course, the end result that we're all looking for. So what is the issue? So the issue arises through mobility, because the way that tax authorities look to source, which basically means allocate income to their authority, is based on time. And in the case of equity income, that is then typically done between grant and vest, sometimes grant and exercise. But for example, we have an example here up on the screen, which is somebody who gets an award in California, moves to New York, and then they move to the UK. That may sound a little hectic, but trust me, we've seen 4 or 5 different countries and states involved in equity issues, so it's not unheard of. But in this case here, the income, if you like, is sourced between March and March 3 years later. So that means that US federal, California, New York, the UK all have a claim to tax part of that income. And that is the fundamental issue that we're dealing with today. And we haven't even started on social security questions and things like that. So where do you report the payroll? Where do you have to report the income? What payroll withholding do you need to make? All of those kind of things are the main issue now that we're dealing with today. Now, a lot of us know the issue, but getting from the known issue to an actual result is a whole different ballgame. So if you are able to know where your people are and calculate the tax and things, it is still a very difficult process to actually get that flowing through your equity and payroll administration to ensure that it's happening correctly. Now, very thankfully today, I'm joined by 2 of our foremost experts in this field, Tara Hagan and Lynn Carbo, who are going to be walking you through the process that we've been helping clients go through. So the real issue is that equity is complicated, as we all know, and mobility is complicated. So you put those 2 very complicated things together and it becomes very complicated. So we've likened it here to mixing oil and water. because there are just two very, very complex issues going on at the same time. And so it does prove a challenge for companies to manage that process in an efficient and compliant manner. So those are some of the challenges that we're going to face today, and we're going to look to walk you through that. What we've done is we've come up with 5 strategies to help a business move their equity program and their mobility program to a better place in terms of compliance around equity. So those top 5 strategies that Tara and Lynn are going to take you through are collaborate, allocate, educate, automate, and dedicate. So I'll say that again: collaborate, allocate, educate, automate, and dedicate. Those 5 steps are going to help you align the process, and hopefully, if you need to, it will allow you to scale up to have a bigger amount of mobility dealt with within that process. We're likely to see that because of remote work adjustments that are coming through. So again, we just thought this was a very sort of on target discussion to have today with some of the changes that we're seeing as we hopefully emerge from this pandemic. So what we'll do now is we'll have our first poll just to sort of see where the audience is. So the question is what is your current state of compliance around equity? Aware but not compliant, partially compliant, fully compliant, or fully compliant with the help of a third party, or not applicable? So give people a section to answer that, and then we will move on, and I will pass it over to Lynn Carbo, who's going to take us through our first strategy. So the results are coming in here. What we're seeing is 8% aware but not compliant, 38% partially compliant, which is probably where I expected it to be, 30% fully compliant. I'm going to challenge some of those people to see if they do that domestically as well. Perhaps we'll come back. If you want to throw something in the question of whether you're tracking it domestically in the US with remote work, as we've been over the last 15 months now, I'd be interested to hear. So with that, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Lynn Carbo, who's going to take us through the first few strategies.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Some interesting insights from our audience. So I don't know if there are any golf fans out there, but on Sunday, Phil Mickelson, at 50 years old, won the PGA Championship. So hearing him speak and reading some of the articles that are written, he breaks it down as saying he trusted the process. He has a team around him supporting him, helping him move forward. He had confidence that he could do it. And lo and behold, it took time. It took a lot of work on his part, of course, and trust in what he was setting his mind to do. So what we want to do today is share with you some strategies that hopefully will lead your organization to success. So our first one is collaborate. So we work with companies and organizations that have mobility programs, formal mobility programs, and moving their people, and oftentimes they hold equity. So we want to make certain that all parties from the equity side, the payroll side, and the mobility HR side have an awareness and appreciation of the challenges that arise when these parts all converge together. So when you have an employee who makes a move, that creates challenges to the equity and payroll team. They're busy handling their standard jobs for delivering pay to their employees. The mobility and HR teams are busy moving their employees from point A to point B to support the roles that they're tasked to do associated with that relocation. And in some cases, all of these groups may not be familiar with the intricacies, as Chris had made mention of, the obligations for reporting, withholding, remittances, all of those things come into play. And if all parties are not cognizant of what does need to happen, we've seen sometimes where perhaps the best laid plans may be out there, but the execution may not have occurred. So hopefully we'll get to the point where we have a 50-plus-year-old champion moving forward and being successful on that front. And in some cases, organizations may not have people in every seat. The equity might be served by payroll, mobility might be served by HR. So there's a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats. So collaboration and alignment is quite important. So Chris, if you take us to
Yep.
our next slide. We did want to ask, how frequently within your organization do your mobility and equity payroll teams meet? Do you meet frequently, daily, at least weekly, somewhat frequently, weekly to multiple times per month, infrequently, once per month or less, or never? So Chris, I think you're seeing the responses.
Yep, just give people another couple of minutes.
Sure thing.
We can just, yeah, we've got 73% of votes in. Very interesting. So only 5% of our attendees today meet frequently. 52% meet infrequently, which was once per month or less, and 18%, quite staggeringly, are never, with 25% somewhat frequently. So quite surprising results there, that there isn't more interaction, I think, between those different groups.
And perhaps that's just an awareness, and people are, like we said, people are busy. But I think as we look to try to provide you with some strategies for moving your program and your reward for your employees forward and making it positive, hopefully, more frequent collaboration and alignment will bring you some success. So we have a payroll story. RSUs awarded from a US-based plan where we as a vendor provided the deliverables to the client for them to share with their payrolls to execute and report. And we've had a couple of different outcomes with different clients. In one case, we had a situation where the withholdings or the files delivered to the local payroll were not executed. And that didn't come to light to the equity team until quite some time later. But when it did, it rang some bells and caused the need for the groups to come together to find out where the shortfall was, were there misunderstandings in communications, and why the reporting and remittances did not occur, and establish processes to make that get into effect and move forward on the future transactions. So your organization may find it useful to collaborate, as we had seen from the poll results, schedule some meetings more regularly to have an appreciation for the challenges that each group is facing when your employees are moving. Recognize that perhaps some HRIS data may not have the information that you need to track for your mobile population. We'll talk about how do you even come up with who that is. And as we had made mention of our case study, review what has been executed and communicated to the global payroll. As Chris had said, end to end, everybody thinks they're doing their job in order to fulfill what's needed in this realm of compliance. And if there are gaps, that's clearly not happening. So collaborating is one way to make certain that we do make this effective. So looking to our next strategy, number 2, to allocate, would be to work to allocate in more ways than one, your resources to support the compliance needs. And then, of course, there's an allocation that comes into play when your employees are moving across borders. So you're busy in HR and mobility, managing the moves. You are busy in equity, managing the equity reporting for domestic people as part of your plan. You're busy in payroll, delivering bonus, commission, standard pay, and the equity as well. So now mobility, HR is saying, now we've got some issues, we've got groups of people that we need to take a look at. We looked at the managed moves on an international and a domestic level. They have requirements in more than one jurisdiction. Self-initiated moves. These are moves where people prefer to say they're going to move somewhere. We'll call that pre-pandemic. Mobility may not have had visibility to those types of moves. That might have been an agreement with an HR business partner. You have executive business travelers. Weren't so many last year, but they'll probably be picking up. And then as a result of our lockdown and working remotely or from anywhere, as Chris had made mention, remote work policies are quite a trend going forward for a lot of companies. And you want to have consistencies in how you're applying your allocation for your remote workers. Are you taking care of their salary and regular components of compensation now that you know that they're in another jurisdiction? So we look to say, acknowledge and accept that you may face challenges in trying to tackle how you're going to address these issues. In many cases, as we had seen on the survey, international tracking is in the lead. Domestic tracking is often a challenge. Companies want to be compliant, but often there are obstacles such as your payroll vendor. There might not be support for multiple state reportings and withholdings. So how do we get over that hurdle? Look to a different subscription within your vendor or perhaps another vendor, but just some things to talk through and think about as to how to move forward and allocate the resources you have and allocate perhaps a budget to getting to purchase such a thing as a new payroll support. And then, of course, challenges on the domestic side for the reciprocity, convenience of employer, applicability of foreign tax credits, logic in terms of how do all of these factors get considered for your domestic mobility people. And then Chris, if you've got another slide to move forward, thank you. So what is the organization's focus? As we had said, we want to align and collaborate and allocate appropriately with the team that you have in place and perhaps maybe add to your team, recognizing that these are challenging issues that need to be addressed in order to support your employees and keep the award as a valuable compensation component, as well as support the employees in these equity, HR, payroll, mobility functions in order to have them be successful in their job in supporting your mobile employees. So as a company, define your thresholds and limitations. Are you going to report just in the first year for a temporary move? You've switched payrolls. Is that your sole reporting? Well, as Chris had made mention and shown on our picture, you've got different points of where the people have been working, and each jurisdiction wants to see a cut of their share of the compensation attributable to the time that you spent on the ground in their jurisdiction. Do you have a threshold for reporting and tracking? Is it going to be strictly a formal move? Do you have high-risk travelers, C-suite employees, perhaps traveling to headquarters? We know in the US, California, and New York, quite aggressive with non-resident reporting required by employers. So, that's probably a focus for some companies to think if that's an issue, maybe we want to focus and allocate resources to that particular group and population. And under the remote work, as Chris had said, that's been a big wave coming out of the pandemic period. And you want to have a consistent approach to all the items of compensation, that you're not going to just source the equity. You need to make certain that everything along the line is consistent, the base salary, your bonus and commissions, and those types of components. And then balancing your risk tolerance with the resources that you have to be able to fulfill the compliance needs. So we'll talk about, on an international level, Canada, our neighbors to the north. It's so easy, or used to be easy to get to. But when you have a move between the US and Canada, or even business travels, that can result in some very challenging reporting and onerous steps that need to be taken. And all parties need to come together and have an appreciation for what is needed and documented. And I will leave this off to Tara to give you some insights into our next strategy, Educate.
Thank you, Lynn. I think that's, Chris and Lynn have given a really good foundation to this issue that I think we're all interested in, and Lynn and I love working in and talking about. And I think the education and communication piece is a huge one. We see that employees are getting this benefit, and do they see it as a benefit? If they're seeing a lot of withholding or an amount of withholding that they don't think is right, do they understand what they're getting? I think Chris talked about how equity is complex on its own for all the employees, no less the mobile employee that now has taxation in 2 jurisdictions and is even more complex, whether it's 2 countries or 2 states. So how do we help those mobile employees, or even the general population as well, and the mobile employees really appreciate their award? I think, one story we think about, and this is, I think, resonates with everyone who's in the US, and I think that's the large portion of our audience here today, is that even for a non-mobility person, the US domestic laws, most people are using the statutory rates at 22% federally for withholding, and that rate on your tax return could go up to 37%. So right off the bat, you've got a 15% gap on what they've been withheld and what they're paying in, and what will happen when they have to file their tax returns. Are they aware of that? I feel like that's maybe the #1 issue that I hear companies talk about or concerned about, not only for their mobile employees, for all their employees. And how do we make sure employees are aware of that point? And you see it, companies have different levels of equity, right? Whether there are issues or options, whether they're broad-based or executive populations. And I know we have a broad audience here of folks who might have different kind of programs, being large or small. But that issue alone is important and meaningful, and deserves some communication and education of the employees. Otherwise, you're probably going to see a lot of hand raising and questions, and that's going to serve all the populations, right? That's going to help the equity teams who are dealing with it coming in as an equity question, the payroll teams who may be getting it coming in as a payroll question, and the HR teams who are maybe thinking it's a policy issue, it's coming in as a policy question, or if it's mobility, like, why did this go this way? So I think we see different levels of communication methods depending on your own company culture and what's meaningful and important for you or your size of your company. On the basic baseline, a general equity memo, and that one is for mobile populations. And what I've seen companies do is give that equity memo at the start of a move. So HR is sharing that memo at the start of a move. The equity team is sharing that memo with every equity event. And if you have a mobility provider or tax provider, they might be sharing that as well. And that memo is simply a one-page statement, was what I've most commonly seen, or short statement that informs the employees, as an employer, we're gonna do our best to, right? We have obligations to report and withhold and remit in the jurisdictions you have worked in while you're employed with our company. and we will be accommodating or meeting these requirements in the countries around the world. And so it's a really simple, I say it simply, I've seen it a little longer, but it's a simple statement of just informing the employees as a first step. And you can take that further to say, do you want an FAQ, make it more exciting? Some companies really like the FAQ format, and that's how they want to show that kind of information. And then some take that to another level and have a webinar to really flow out that, maybe a once a year webinar for their mobile employees that explains the issues that they will be facing. And then going to another level. So that's kind of a baseline level of sort of education and communication, and educating your employees. And sometimes these things are not just educating your employees, they are educating your employees, but not just the population that's receiving the awards, but potentially your HR teams, your payroll teams, your equity team members, maybe the recruiting teams, the HRBPs that are representing your mobile employees. So that can be an education piece that goes beyond just the mobile employee, if you will. And I think serves the company at a large level. Taking that to another level, we see companies who kind of want to do more for their mobile employees and offer tax counseling sessions in those home and host jurisdictions, frequently focusing on the equity, although they may obviously talk about general tax matters, but the equity piece of it may be a significant focus if that's a significant part of their compensation. And that could be bolstered by a memo. We used to do, we do for companies country to country memos. So from the US to the UK, here's what you can expect in the US, and here's what you can expect in the UK in terms of treatment for the RSU, the ESPP, the option, whatever the award might be for that company and their award plans. We've not even so recently now, in the last few years, we've really taken that to the next level and added a sample calculation to that memo, which then shows for that same fact pattern, here's what's going to happen at the transaction, here's what's going to get reported in payroll, here's the withholding that you're going to have, then here's what's going to happen on the US tax return, whether it's a balance due, whether it's a refund, whether it's even. And the same in the UK, so that they can see what they can expect. And that's sort of a general calculation that can be used over and over again for that same fact pattern. So you get to kind of get some more bang for your buck there. And I think that's been really helpful to address questions. And I think for tax counseling sessions, one of the stories I really like to see is about a case where, and I think most people know about the Singapore deemed exercise rules. So when employees move into the US and move into Singapore, a tax counseling session is given. That if they're non-Singaporeans, they are informed that if they leave Singapore again and they've been granted awards, the unvested awards will be taxed. What I've seen companies add and seen happen is where a non-Singaporean got local hired, so he wasn't considered a mobility person, wasn't considered a mover, but he still, when he left Singapore, was going to be subject to these deemed exercise rules. And so that company added to their program counseling sessions for local hires who were non-Singaporeans with respect to the equity piece of the story, to manage that expectation and manage that issue. And that's something that, we share, right? A lot of times you learn things through the pain points and you then get to the other side. And some of the things you'll keep evolving. Just like this memo, we sort of evolved it. We started with a memo and then we added that calculation and kind of keep upping our game. And then sort of an advanced version of the education and communication, I think are good stories, is going to a custom calculation. So we gave a generic calculation. If it's somebody who's got a lot of awards, or an executive or a VIP where it's really going to be a critical part of the story of their move, then maybe they need a projection of what that's going to look like for them with their awards ahead of time. And realizing you're going to take a fair market value at the moment in time, and it could be different down the road. But that's kind of taking your education to the top level, I think, in terms of educating your employees and giving them that information. And then beyond that, of course, a tax return preparation support is something we see often in the mobility space for moves from country to country or state to state to help with that complexity. I think the big piece of the story is, whatever you choose, wherever you're at in your communication plans, is how important it is for your employee experience, to avoid surprises, to manage expectations, and to what extent you do, really relates to your own company and company culture and your equity plans. So we can go to the next one. I think continues on our educate theme, and going a deeper dive into the international piece, because I think the international piece can be more complicated. We kind of keep starting with the, it's complicated already at non-movers, then it gets more complicated domestic, and even more complicated, I think, with the international moves and movers. I think that's why you're seeing for remote work cases that a lot of companies are saying, yeah, that's fine to move state to state, but we're not allowing international moves yet, or they're not ready for it. So in terms of that global compliance communications, one of the big issues, I think, is that companies are applying rules, the tax rules, but they may also be applying company logic or company administrative logic that is not necessarily completely tied to the tax rules. I think one of the most common things that we see in that top left corner is using the maximum tax rates of withholding for your global population around the world, which can have an even bigger effect on the mobile employees, because now they're subject to maximum rates in 2 jurisdictions or more. So that philosophy of what withholding rates you're using is an important piece of information for your employees to know about. And not only for that reason, to manage, right, their potentially tax return compliance, tax return payments that they need to make outside of the payroll or the equity administration. As we know, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, in the case of U.S. employees, like people know, employees get to control how much withholding they have, right, through their W-4 on salary. And that can be, if you think that's going to carry over to your other compensation, such as equity or bonus, you'll be mistaken, right? It can give a false sense of security or impression to employees. So that really needs, it needs attention, and including that rate. And that maximum rate of withholding, I think, is something that we see a lot of, but it also can be a pain point if we also see companies take the other position of using a marginal rate or a payroll rate so that they can achieve the most equity or stock in their employees' hands, right? So they minimize, if you will, the withholding rates and achieve more dollars in their pocket. In any event, I think the other piece that comes with that global compliance is the foreign tax credits, and I think we see that happen in a lot of different ways for our companies. Some companies are taking, in this example, right, that Chris gave us of US, California to New York to the UK, taking withholding from all the jurisdictions touched at the maximum rate, 100%. They didn't want to be under, so they were way over. Then you see other companies doing just the current location, right, where they're going wrong, because administratively they can't handle anything more complicated than that, or their tools can't handle something more complicated than that. But hopefully if you're adjusting for foreign tax credits, you're going to allow a reduction in your non-resident or in your resident location for the non-resident tax, if you want to say it that way. And that will, if that is something that can happen through payroll, and we see that it can happen through payroll, we definitely want our teams to know about it. And if it can't happen through payroll, that's another important communication to ensure your employees know about. Related to that is Social Security, whether that's being applied or not. We've seen a lot of companies use a practical approach around Social Security to report in the host country only. Frequently, it is not necessarily the letter of the law, but it is what your payrolls can manage and handle. And again, that brings back the connection between your equity team and your payroll team. If your equity team is processing your awards for employees one way, and then payroll does it another way, getting that synced up is going to be really important, and helping employees understand that is part of that story. And then finally, I guess some special concessions to talk about that we see commonly and are important for employees to know about. I think Lynn maybe touched on it a little bit. The Canadian waivers is one that we see frequently for US to Canada employees. Those employees are maybe eligible to apply for a waiver of Canadian tax on US sourced income, and that can improve a withholding rate from 100% or more to maybe 80 or 70 or 60%, which can make for a much happier employee. But that's something that you probably want to inform your employees about. They could find out about it themselves, but they might not be very happy if they find out after they've gotten no award and they would have liked to have some equity in the company. And again, that goes back to, are you achieving what you want with this award? And if they're not getting any net award, then you're definitely not. And other concessions, I think the Netherlands and the Spain have special expat regimes that may be incorporated into your equity processing, and certainly employees will want to take advantage of that if they're eligible. I think the takeaway here is, for employee experience, you might want to consider a higher level of service, consultations, some pre-briefs and debriefs with your payroll teams to find out, is it happening the way you think? Are they able to execute on the advice? So we will go to automate, which I think is, I don't know, maybe one of the most exciting areas. I mean, this is an area I think that is really what we're seeing a lot of conversations on, because the pandemic has increased the number of for the US, state-to-state employees. People have moved or said, as long as I can work remotely, I'm going to go somewhere else now and work there. And now they've had an award granted in one place and moved to another during the pandemic, and that award is subject to tax in both those locations. So with these sort of high increase in numbers, it just becomes very difficult. We've been talking to companies who have been doing this all by hand calculating their entire international mobile population, and ignoring the domestic moves because they thought they were pretty small numbers. With the pandemic, they've seen the numbers go up, and usually, right, these companies are finding out this data from their HRIS system or from HR reports. And so they can see the volume. I've talked to some companies where it's really literally 10 times the volume that they had before the pandemic. And so it's almost a non-negotiable. It has to be automated. It's almost impossible to continue to do it by hand and do it quickly without error, without taking, all the resources of your team. And that starts with the policy that Lynn and I have been talking about. What's your approach? How are you doing it? Gather that employer data, whether that comes from your HRIS system, from your HR team, your global mobility team. Most commonly, we see address change reports is how equity teams are gathering those mobile populations. But I think what can be really interesting is that, back to that collaboration point from Lynn, is sometimes if you have that once a month meeting with your, the mobility and the equity and the payroll, sometimes they know about people moving that equity team knows about people who move that the HR team didn't know, and vice versa. So that's a moment there when that collaboration really comes into play. Then we've got the equity data. I think that equity team is really owning that data and all the award data. You bring all of that 1, 2, 3 together into your calculations, whether you're doing it by hand, whether you've got an external party helping, to get that reporting withholding right for that award for your mobile employees. And then on the right-hand side comes to how do you then communicate and deliver that back out? And can we automate that too? Can we automate that instruction to your broker, automate that instructions to your global payroll teams, and automate the information to your employees so they have a better sense of what happened to their awards and what they ended up with? I've seen and heard companies and that are manually doing a lot of these steps, and again, with the volumes going up, it's not really scalable or maintainable, and a good time to look at a new way to do things. So whether you're doing it by hand or you've got a partially automated process, I think automation can help with errors, with timing, and with freeing up your team for more strategic tasks. We'll go to number 5, strategy number 5. Here we go. Number 5 is resource management. And I think we've talked about a lot of parties at the table here. I know equity is kind of at the center, and this audience, I think we've really invited a broad spectrum of the mobility folks, the equity folks, the payroll folks. So we're trying to talk to all the parties here, but it's a balance of how do you dedicate these resources, and do you have the right dollars and right people and the right resources? Do you have the right resources in-house? Do you need it out-of-house? Who and what do you use? Are you a big company that has maybe some flexibility to use across teams, or are you a small company and have really limited resources? You can do the first 4, collaborate, allocate, educate, automate, and then if you're not dedicating the resources in the right place, you may not achieve your goals. I saw a really interesting case of a company that was limited on budget. So I know, finding the budget for making improvements, doing better in your equity can be challenging. But I think the benefits are there and you can see it. But some of the interesting ways I've seen companies deal with some resource issues is taking staff members from the HR benefits team who might really understand equity and cross-training them. And so in this way, you get that collaborative effect, you get some cross-training, you have some backup to your team, they bring it back to the HR teams, and that could be sort of a win-win for everybody. And I thought it was really interesting and creative way to add some resources or add some strength to your team. And I've been hearing lately some of the external consultants and providers either saying they can't do something and they can't help, or they're actually out of resources, they don't have capacity, and that's something to consider if you're looking at your who your partners are. Is maybe you need to reevaluate. Is it that nobody can do it, or is it that somebody else can do it? And I know that takes time, but that can be worth the time, and reevaluating. Okay, who's helping us, and is it the right fit? Have we moved to a new place and they're not the right fit anymore? And in the end, I feel like the equity team is really the director of this, the oversight and the audit. I mean, questions may come back to HR, they may come back to payroll, but the equity team is really directing payroll, right? And it's directing the administrator. So I think that audit that audit and sort of the buck stops with the equity team in a lot of ways. In terms of technology, we've talked a little bit about automate. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and Lynn talked about payroll. You know, do you want to step up your payroll platform? Is it able to support multiple states or not? And you know, if you have an interest in it and your payroll team has an interest in it, now you've got two parties advocating for a payroll upgrade. And the payroll team might be really happy that you did it, and vice versa, right? It's going to be something for everybody. I recently talked to a company that was reevaluating their broker administration tool. They just found that they weren't getting the reports they needed. It wasn't robust enough for them anymore. And while, you know, making a platform change can be a big deal, they were going to do it. They were taking that step. So that's, you know, maybe sounds like a really big thing to tackle, but it's potentially a really big benefit. And that can be true. Another story I heard recently was an HRIS ADP integration that a company was trying to achieve. So trying to automate. And unfortunately, after 9 months of that project, it didn't work. So I guess the point of that story is you may go down a road and realize it's not working for everybody. And if you keep collaborating, you can kind of reevaluate and take a step back. You might have to go down another road. There's not just one path to this solution. And I guess all of these things, you know, all of these techniques help you scale up, right? With balancing your resources, automating, collaborating, help you scale up and achieve better compliance and improved employee experience. It takes a village, but I think what I would say in terms of research management is pick your priorities, pick one area of improvement to tackle in the next 6 months or 3 months, whatever that timeline might be, whether it's a pain point, whether it's an exposure area, and evaluate your resources that you're already using. And it might mean upgrading services, or it might be just shifting resources that you already kind of have in place. But I think taking that time can serve you and your company. And I'll turn it back to Chris.
Okay, I think we have our final poll now.
I love this poll.
Yes, what is the greatest challenge to equity mobility compliance process? So we'll open that poll now. I'll watch those results come in. And just while people are doing that, we've had a couple of questions come in. If we have any more, please type them in now, and we'll try and fit them in this last 10 minutes that we have before we depart. So just give people a few more seconds to vote here. Excellent. So we have big spikes in a lack of an automated process. Lack of mobility data is also a big one, and employee understanding the transaction reporting and the shared delivery. So that employee experience is clearly, you know, a very vital part of any strategy that you're going to bring in when you're addressing this as a as a process. I think it's key to keep that fully in front of mind. Excellent. So thank you for being involved. So I think what we've talked about today is really the fact that identifying the issue is really just it really is just the beginning of that process. You know, from going to recognizing you have an issue to actually delivering equity in a way that works for your employees and for the company from a compliance perspective is quite a challenge in terms of the different pieces that are involved. So that idea, and we will share slides, I think, after this, but there's the idea really is, you know, get together first of all. That's the collaborate. Allocate in terms of deciding who you're going to look after and where you're going to set your thresholds. Don't forget that employee education. We just had it on the survey there. It has been a very important element. Automate where you can. Got a question on that, which I'll ask Tara and Lynn to weigh in on in a second. But automation is certainly the way to go and is the future. And then dedicate, if you're going to start the process, make sure that you have the right resources and enough resources in place to see it through from beginning to end. The end-to-end process is key. We've seen it before. I think Lynn mentioned it. You calculate everything, everything's done, everything gets sent out, and then it falls down at the very last leg. You may as well have not even started at that point. So dedicate those resources and make sure that the process is working globally. Because again, that's where we've often seen clients, is that it's non-US payrolls that are having the largest challenge with reporting some of these items. So follow those 5 steps, and we hope our oil and water analogy from earlier on turns into some fine vinaigrette for you. But with that, I'll open it up. If anybody has questions, please type them in. I have a couple to ask to Tara and to Lynn. Lynn, you were speaking earlier about thresholds under the allocate section. Now, are they formal thresholds that you're talking about, or practical thresholds?
That was, I think, practical. From what does the company want to, where are their risks? And determine, say, for a short-term assignment, perhaps overseas from the US abroad, perhaps there's a treaty in play. Should we just totally take that off the table? And then from a threshold of, we know we've got a particular executive that travels once every 6 weeks, and he goes to Canada. So he's someone we really need to keep track of. He might not be part of the mobility team's realm, but that's where we said your HIRS system might not have it, but everybody speaking together, I think, can come up with who do we deem to be mobile that needs our attention.
Yeah. So you'd say, do you advise on a given level of income that you would look at, and say, no, we're not gonna go to that level, or is it really just jurisdictional?
On an income level, well, I think you want to look from, is it a high level? Are you looking at quarterly vests? Are you looking at stock option exercises? So
Yeah.
Manage what it is we're looking at in terms of thresholds and allowances in a country. Perhaps they might wipe out a liability. So,
and I've seen companies, if I jump in, look at it to minimises if they feel like like you said, the risk is low, and that may be related to jurisdictions. Certain jurisdictions, there might be no de minimis, and certain jurisdictions a floor under which, if the allocation of award to that location goes under 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, you have to decide what that risk tolerance is for the year, then maybe you would skip it. But that's company by company, and most tax advisors aren't going to say skip it if it's a compliant obligation. That's good, but you'll have to take that one internally.
Yeah, and another question that just came in, I'll pitch this to both of you, so whoever gets there first. There's a question about state-to-state allocation, and how important is that, and how is it done? When people are moving domestically in the US. Tara, I'll direct that to you, because
right? I'm sitting in California. Lynn's sitting on the East Coast in Pennsylvania, so we're trying to cover the whole country here. But in California, the state-to-state issue is significant because of, during the pandemic, a lot of California-based employees moved outside of California to lower tax or no tax jurisdictions. California is particularly interesting because, well, they certainly want their share of the pie, and they've got strong audit procedures. But for, I guess, the other piece of it, if you've got options, is they're looking at the awards differently than the federal government or than some other states. You know, some states are looking at grant to vest versus grant to exercise on an option. So that can add just another wrinkle to your state compliance. You might have a different, well, you'll definitely most likely have a different reporting in the state of California than you're going to have in another state. So it's definitely one near and dear, and I think on the West Coast, it's a significant reason why the automation is being looked at by a lot of companies, you know, working in some automation, because the volume of people is just too high.
Yep.
Yeah.
And likewise on the East Coast as well. I mean, New York, all the states, they want a piece of it. And here in Pennsylvania, ISOs aren't recognized. So you've got a different taxation point for your ISOs. We don't see as many on the East Coast, but if your people have been granted ISOs, move from your side to over here, you know, that's going to create a Pennsylvania liability at exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent. So I think the last question that we have here is just, Tara, to you, just you mentioned automation. What kind of products are people using in the marketplace to kind of help with this?
Yeah, so most of the large accounting firms have some kind of tool, whether it's automated or more Excel based. I think a lot of companies are using Excel based. You know, obviously GTN has what we consider a robust tool, and also companies are using their brokers in some cases if their broker has an ability to do that. What we find is a couple of things in those cases. The broker approaches can be more limited in terms of their sophistication, so you might not get the best answer for your employees, but you'll kind of get a middle of the road, and some companies are fine with that. The brokers also aren't tax advisors, so typically you need a tax advisor to kind of guide on what the broker is going to be doing tax-wise, or somebody in your firm who's a tax person, you know, guiding on the tax treatment. Yeah. So I think those are probably the three most common.
Excellent. Well, with that, our time has come to an end. I want to thank all of our attendees for both listening in today and for posing their questions and for answering the polls. So thank you to the audience, but most of all, thank you to Tara and Lynn, our two experts in chief on all things equity. And yeah, we will share out the presentation after the event. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Happy early Memorial Day.